What does it actually mean to be the best player a country has ever produced?
Does it simply mean the most talented, the most complete, the most entertaining? Or does being the best mean combining elite ability with unmatched achievements, influence, longevity, and delivering on the biggest stage? Because if that's our definition, then Brazil's best footballer isn't Neymar. It's Edson Arantes do Nascimento. And yes, that's Pelé. Before comparing players, we have to define the word best. Being the best player to come out of a nation isn't just about who has the biggest bag of tricks or who is technically the most complete. It's about who reached the highest level as an individual, who dominated their era, who influenced football, who performed on the biggest stages, who left the greatest legacy. Talent is only one piece of the puzzle, because if being the best only meant being the most complete, then football history will look very different. The best player a country has ever produced is the player who combines early footballing ability with the greatest impact, achievements, and performances. And by that standard, Pelé still stands above everyone Brazil has produced. The strongest argument people usually make in favor of Neymar is that Neymar is the more complete player, the more complete footballer, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. Neymar could play as a winger, as an attacking midfielder, as a false nine, or even a second striker. His close control was magical, his creativity was outrageous, his flair was unmatched. But here's where people undersell Pelé. They talk about him as if he was simply a clinical finisher who happened to score a lot of goals. He wasn't. Edson Arantes do Nascimento could do almost everything. He scored with both feet. He was exceptional in the air despite not being particularly tall. He dropped into midfield to detect attacks. He created chances. He played defense-splitting passes. He dribbled through defenders with ease. He could strike from distance. He took free kicks. He could beat players with tricks that looked decades ahead of their time. Watch his footage carefully. The body feints, the no-look movements, the famous dummy around the goalkeeper in 1970 without even touching the ball, the spins, the flicks, the elastic body control. These weren't normal in the 1960s. Many of the skills we celebrate today were already being performed by Pelé over half a century ago. So even if someone believes Neymar was slightly more complete technically, Pelé wasn't far behind. The gap, if there even was one, certainly wasn't large enough to overcome everything else that separated them. Imagine doing all Pelé did without modern protection. This is something younger fans often overlook. Football wasn't officiated the way it is today. There was no VAR, very few yellow cards. Defenders were allowed to kick, grab, and hack attackers repeatedly. Some tackles would be straight red cards today. Back then, they often weren't even fouls. Pelé wasn't protected, he was targeted. Opponents knew stopping him often meant kicking him. Yes, despite that brutality, he still dominated, he still dribbled, he still entertained, he still scored. That makes his achievements even more remarkable. If you want to understand Pelé at his absolute peak, watch Mexico 1970. This wasn't just a striker scoring goals. This was a complete footballer controlling games. He scored, he created, he orchestrated attacks. He produced one iconic moment after another. His vision was extraordinary. For decades, Pelé held the record for the most assists in a single FIFA World Cup tournament, a record that stood for more than 50 years before it was finally surpassed by Michael Olise. He also won the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player, and perhaps most importantly, he led one of the greatest international teams football has ever seen. Pelé remains football's only player to win 3 FIFA World Cups, 1958, 1962, and 1970. Even at just 17 years old in Sweden, he scored in every knockout stage game and then produced one of the greatest World Cup final performances ever. By the end of his international career, he had become the face of Brazilian football, the man who transformed Brazil into football's greatest nation. He didn't just win, he helped define Brazil's footballing identity. Another mistake people make is judging Pelé's career through today's football landscape. Today, every elite South American player dreams of moving to Europe because that's where the strongest leagues are. But that wasn't always the case. During Pelé's prime, Brazilian football was widely regarded as one of, if not the strongest, football leagues in the world. Brazil had won the 1958 and 1962 World Cup, and the country's clubs were filled with world-class players because there wasn't the same mass migration to Europe that we see today. Santos weren't just dominating in Brazil, they traveled across the world, facing Europe's biggest clubs in prestigious friendlies and tournaments, and they regularly won. These weren't exhibition matches where nobody cared. European clubs wanted to prove they could beat the team that had the greatest player on earth. And more often than not, Edson Arantes do Nascimento and Santos came out on top. So when people say Pelé never played in Europe, remember this. At the time, the best football didn't necessarily live in Europe. For much of Pelé's career, the world came to Brazil, and Brazil, led by Pelé, showed why it was the standard everyone else was chasing. The argument that Pelé never proved himself in Europe, that argument ignores the context of the time. When European giants came calling, Brazil didn't want to lose its greatest sporting icon. In the early 1960s, Edson Arantes do Nascimento was declared a national treasure by the Brazilian government. The designation was intended to prevent him from being transferred abroad, allowing Santos and Brazilian football to keep the country's biggest star. Think about that for a moment. Most legends dream of earning a move to Europe's biggest clubs. Pelé became so valued to Brazil that the country wanted to keep him at home. That's how important he was, not just to Santos, but to the entire nation. And despite staying in Brazil, he still faced and excelled against many of Europe's top clubs in high-profile friendlies and international tours. Santos regularly traveled the world, beating some of the strongest teams of the era, with Pelé almost and always at the center of those performances. So saying Pelé never tested himself in Europe overlooks the reality of his career. But Pelé never won the Ballon d'Or. Technically, that's true, but it's also misleading. For most of Pelé's career, the Ballon d'Or was only open to European players. He wasn't eligible. Pelé would have won multiple Ballon d'Ors under modern rules. His greatness was also recognized in other ways. He received the FIFA Ballon d'Or prize, the honor, for his lifetime achievements. He was FIFA's Player of the Century alongside Diego Maradona. He was recognized by the International Olympic Committee as Athlete of the Century. Very few footballers have ever received honors on that level. Could Neymar have been the more naturally gifted dribbler? Maybe. Could someone argue he was more complete? That's a debate worth having. But that's not enough. Because Pelé wasn't simply close technically. He was already elite. And once you add everything else, 3 World Cups, historic performances, individual awards, goal scoring, playmaking, longevity, and leadership, and transforming Brazilian football, the debate becomes much harder. When people hear the name Edson Arantes do Nascimento, they don't just think about trophies. They think about the man who showed the world what football could be, the player who mixed artistry with efficiency, creativity with ruthlessness, entertainment with winning. Neymar gave Brazil unforgettable moments, but Pelé gave Brazil its footballing identity. And that's why Neymar may have an argument as one of Brazil's most talented players. But when we are talking about the best footballer ever to come out of Brazil as a nation, the answer is still Edson Arantes do Nascimento.